Chapter 20. Sam stared at the blood pooling on the grass for a full minute before she realized that it wasn't hers. Jacob was lying there, his body twitching. Axeman stood over him. The Haberline was staring at the body with an expression that Sam took a moment to recognize. Horror. Regret. She made herself sit up, made her mouth work. "It's okay, you had to do it." Axeman touched the body, shuddered. Sam realized that Jacob's eyes were open, frosted windows staring at nothing. Her hand shaking, she reached down, awkwardly tried to close them. It didn't work. They stayed open. A cuff! Axeman had hit her. She looked at him. "Dead. Don't touch." Sam nodded, stood up, saw the blood splashed on her battered clothes. The air smelled of it. Axeman pointed at himself. "Dead." Sam shook her head. "You're not dead, you—" "Oh." He had a fever, perhaps, one of the symptoms of the virus. Had he come after her, hoping for something? A cure? And he had found Jacob and— "Thank you for saving my life," she said. Axeman said nothing, just pointed into the ravine. Sam frowned, and then she remembered and peered over the edge and shouted, "Joe! Joe!" There was no reply. Joe ran, cursing the thickets and creepers that crowded around the muddy remains of what was probably a major river in the rainy season. She'd tried walking on the riverbed, but the mud that had cushioned her fall, and probably saved her life, had clung on to her bruised and aching legs, refusing to let her make any progress. Yet she had to get back somehow. She had to get back up to Sam before Jacob— Try not to think about that. Probably too late anyway. Ahead, a tree. A scrambling, deep-rooted, many-branched snake of a tree. Joe didn't recognize the species. Perhaps it was extinct in the modern world. But it should be possible to climb. She followed the maze of branches to plot out a route that would take her to the top of the cliff. Then she saw something impossible. At first she thought it was carved into the tree, perhaps by Jacob. Then she realized that it was in the rock behind the tree. Letters, words. Each one must be 6 feet high. Sam, Theta. The rest was hidden. No, not hidden. Lost. Cut off by a dark spur of rock, a basaltic intrusion, millennia-old magma breaking open the fossil. Fossilized words. I must have hit my head when I fell, thought Joe. I simply have to be seeing things. A voice. Faint, echoing, but unmistakably female. Sam's voice. Joe shouted back, but kept staring at the fossil. Somewhere behind her there was a splash, a curse, and a Haberline grunt. Joe frowned, turned, saw Sam and Axeman up to their knees in one of the muddy pools. She started to smile, then saw the blood. "Sam, are you—" "I'm fine." The younger woman was staring beyond Joe. At the rock, at the words, her name. Sam. I think somebody wanted to leave a message for you," said Joe. Their eyes met, and they both started to laugh. Axeman looked at them in amazement. As soon as Morvril saw the blood on Kittig's hands, she knew. She had watched him come down from the hilltop, had watched the way he was walking, the way his head hung as if it had become too heavy, and she had suspected. But the blood told her for certain. "You found them," she said. Kittig looked up, stopped his slow funereal walk a few yards from Morvril. His night eyes flickered. Even in the tropical daylight, she could glimpse the anger there. Morvril faced those eyes. "We could have hidden them better, I suppose." Kittig pushed past her. Morvril could smell the anger now, the fear and the despair. "You knew we'd killed humans. I told you. You knew why." There was no reply. Morvril turned and followed him down the paved road towards the command dome. Their hooves clicked on the coloured stone. She felt it slipping away from her, the future, the innocence and the beauty she had tried to create from the fire. Kittig! He was at the door of the dome now, trying to get past the guards. They looked up at Morvril, uncertain. "Let him through," she ordered. She increased her speed to a trot, caught up with Kittig in the entrance hall, and its curtained-over pictures of death. He was drawing back the curtains. When he shouted at her, the sound was so loud that it echoed. "This is your civilization," he roared. "This is what you tried to hide from me." "I didn't try." Kittig ripped back another curtain. The city glowed, tractites died. "You hid it from our whole civilization. You have made it unreal." Another curtain. Blood, death, misery. "You can't blame me for—" She heard the guards trotting up, waved them back. "The Book of Keeping. The Watchers. You're already doing it, aren't you? You're already writing the lies." "Just one threat. There's only one evil, one person who brings it. Everything else is dealt with by sweet reason." "You're not making sense. Would you rather have been fighting endless wars, like all the other races, the Zygons and the Daleks and the Draconians and the Chelonians and the humans? Is that what you want now? This way, we've got a head start on everybody else in this sector. Practically every other species in the galaxy is still learning how to make fire. We can make all that space ours and live in peace, forever." She curled the long fingers of her hands. "Kittig, you've lived in that world. You are that world. Surely you understand." Kittig tore back the last curtain, stared at the images of death for a while. "My world is based on a lie." His voice was quieter. "A small lie, and death. A few deaths." Kittig turned his head and their eyes met. "Let the doctor go," he said. Morvril closed her eyes. "I can't," she moaned. "You know I can't." "Then I will leave your community. I will not live among murderers." He walked past her, his body almost touching hers in the narrow passageway between the bas-reliefs of death. Morvril stopped him with a touch of her hand on the bare skin of his flank. "You're my future, the future I want to build. Please don't leave me." Her voice choked on the last word, became an incoherent sound, a child's terror at being left alone. She felt him trembling. "I'm sorry." Then he was gone. Morvril looked at the bas-reliefs on the wall. She looked at the tractites in agony, the blaze of power from human weapons. Then she made her decision. They found another part of the message further down the ravine. Sam spotted it first. It was engraved on a different kind of rock, inverted and weirdly distorted, the letters almost unrecognizable as such. But now they knew what they were looking for. It was easy enough to work out what it said. There were two pieces, separated by a fault line. Ated 1.07 million years before and Ed into the volcano just before. "A million years before?" asked Joe. "Before what?" "Before now, I suppose. I reckon the TARDIS materialized in the volcano. No, that can't be right. They'd never have got it out. On the slopes?" A grunt from Axman. "There!" He was pointing at the opposite wall of the ravine, at something that glinted in the sunlight. More letters, smaller, made of patterned quartz set into the rock. Joe looked at Axman, who was staring at the pattern with a curious expression on his face. He'd obviously realized what sort of shapes they were looking for. She wondered if the TARDIS had translated the words. "He will find you. Beware armed tractites. I am in the main Armed tractites?" Sam seemed bewildered. "I told you," said Joe. "They always turn out bad in the end. I'm more worried about who's going to find us." "There," said Axman again. Sure enough, there were more letters in the same quartz pattern. Basalt. If only Rowena were here, thought Joe. If only Rowena were alive. She would know how to find more of the message. It must all be about the same age, from whenever the Doctor got stranded. He must have carved it lots of times. "I've got it," said Sam suddenly. The TARDIS is here! That's what he's trying to tell us. Jo turned, stared into the younger woman's eyes. Sam was actually jumping up and down, her face flushed, running her hands through her hair in excitement. "It has to be here," she said. "It's obvious. Otherwise we'd never have been able to understand Axeman, and Volcano, and Basalt. He must have landed it in the middle of an eruption, the dozy idiot." "Beware armed tractites?" asked Jo. Sam stopped jumping up and down, looked down at her muddy and battered trainers. I think he got himself captured. I am in the main D. Is that dome? Dormitory? Destructor unit? And there's probably any amount of volcanic basalt around here and no way of telling how old it is. Even assuming it isn't buried under 1,000 feet of more recent sediments. We've got to find more of the message, something more specific. "And we'll have to find it quickly," said Sam. Her voice was strangely thick. Jo looked at her, saw that her face was still red. So it wasn't excitement. "Are you—" she began. Sam nodded. "I've got a fever,"